Hi, this is Brian Sizdek, Product Manager at Stolting. I'd like to give you some information about our psychological assessments, about how they're used and developed, and about distribution and translation of instruments. We'll talk about test development, testing purpose, and ethics of testing. Let's now cover test development from the initial stages of a test being developed through its ongoing clinical support. We'll use the example of the Leiter International Performance Scale 3rd edition, or Leiter 3, a nonverbal assessment of cognition, attention, and memory to illustrate each of the steps. A test typically begins by identifying a need for an assessment or treatment that is not currently available. Content is then developed for that test through expert content creation and through theory. The Leiter 3 filled a need for a new nonverbal assessment of cognition, attention, and memory. Authors of the Leiter 3 reviewed past editions of the test and identified current needs and revised past editions to create the Leiter 3 content. A test is then researched to ensure that it's fair and that it measures what it is intended to measure well. For the Leiter 3, this involved ensuring that the test covered the ages of 3 to 75 and was representative of current demographics. In addition, specific clinical cases for whom the nonverbal test would likely be used, including individuals with communication issues, hearing issues, speaking the primary language as a second language, also were included in the sample to ensure it was fair for them. Normative scores were derived. This is able to show the context of a particular score relative to same age peers. A test may then be adapted for international use. The test must be translated into the target language. The manual, record forms, and scoring must be translated as well. The test must then be researched to ensure it's valid in the new culture and that it's fair within the context in which it's intended to be used. The Leiter 3 has been translated into a number of different languages. Being that the Leiter 3 is a nonverbal test, it's necessary to translate the manual and record form that the scoring is seen by the stakeholders. The Leiter 3 must then be researched to ensure it's fair and may be normed in the target population as well. Once a test is developed, its support does not stop there. There's ongoing clinical support that's necessary that consists of consultation to test users, review of any technical issues that may arise, as well as consultation for that. The test must also be monitored to protect its integrity. For the Leiter 3, this ensures that the test will continue to remain valid by ensuring that only authorized users are using the tests, that it's not available to the general public. Any examiners that have questions or require any training will also be provided those answers. So why do we use psychological assessments? Well, there may be a number of reasons. One of the most important is to be able to understand individual strengths and weaknesses so that we can utilize strengths and build upon those weaknesses. For example, a student with language issues may be referred for having attention problems. Now, we may not know what is causing those attention problems. A good choice of a test that could be used would be the Leiter 3. Being that it's a nonverbal test, it doesn't account for language as a possible contributing factor. Let's say in this example, we administer the Leiter 3 and we find that the cognitive composite comes out normal, memory comes out normal, but attention comes out low. The scoring for the Leiter 3 and for other psychological assessments is scaled to a certain scale. This may mean that an average score is scaled to be a score of 50 or 100, or with many tests, 10. With the Leiter 3, there's a range of what's considered average. Scores from 8 to 10 are considered average, 4 to 8 are considered below average. So perhaps this individual obtained the following composite scores. We can see cognition and memory were approximately average. This means that once the student understands the information and he or she is capable of understanding it, that he or she will tend to remember that information. However, we can see the attention score is below average. Now, there's many different forms of attention. The letter 3 breaks down attention in many different subcategories. So we can look at the student's sustained attention. This means that he's able to keep his attention once engaged over long term. We can look at processing speed. This student's able to work quickly. However, we can see for divided attention, which is when there are 2 or more tasks that require focus, and inhibition, which means the ability to delay external stimuli, we see that student's much weaker in those areas. Taken together, we can see that the student is capable of learning, but distractions should be minimized. This means that this could be a good recommendation for teachers and educators working with this student. They need to keep him in a sustained, engaged way and reduce any kind of external stimuli. Another reason for using a test could be for research. Research can cover everything from clinical trials for new pharmaceuticals to finding best practices for education and treatment to addressing any issue that requires evidence-based approaches. Research then informs best practice for treatment providers, assessors, and mental health professionals to then use in their clinical work. Assessments that are used in research have field validity, so you can trust that any of these assessments have a great deal of use and you can feel free to use them and know that they support evidence-based treatments. Stolting assessments are well researched. You'll find on each of their product pages a listing of some selected research assessments. For example, our Stroop Color and Word test is a well-researched test. You can see many of its different uses for different types of trials on the Details tab for our product page. Another area that testing serves is evaluation. This can include program evaluation. Nowadays, many grants and funding opportunities require demonstrated efficacy of programs. In addition, it also shows stakeholders that your program is effective. Also, treatment evaluation should be an integral part of every health provider's operations. In treatment evaluation, ideally we want to start by assessing the client or a group of clients' issues. We then want a treatment plan for those issues. So we want to take the results we obtain from testing and form specific recommendations and ways to go about addressing those issues. We then want to follow up. We want to see, is our treatment working, so we could then do some post-testing after our treatment and compare that with initial testing. This should then lead to a revision of treatment plan, upon which you can see this cycle should continue ongoing from beginning of treatment to end. Psychological tests must be used ethically as a responsible way of using the tests. The first issue of ethical test use is that the tests must be used by only qualified professionals. Stolting follows a level system promulgated by the APA, American Psychological Association, and other accrediting agencies, in which basically tests are categorized as being qualified to use by 3 professionals, A, B, or C type professionals. A professionals have had some training in assessment or education. Typically, assessments like checklists or questionnaires are A-level assessments. They can be administered by teachers or therapists. Most assessments fall under B-level categorization. These are qualified to be used by people with training in assessment and psychometrics and a degree, typically an advanced degree in mental health treatment. Assessments such as these are emotional and behavioral inventories, interviews, observation, and some performance-based measures. Social workers, counselors, school psychologists are qualified to use these types of tests. Finally, the tests that require the most training, such as typically at the doctorate level, are neuropsychological and cognitive tests. And they are used for diagnosing and addressing underlying, more complicated issues. They're typically given by clinical psychologists or psychiatrists. Stolting has all this information, the level descriptions, and the types of tests that can be used by those people on our website. Other aspects of ethical test use are: number one, following the standardization procedures described in the test manual. The tests are normed following these same procedures, and so therefore it is critical to use those same procedures so to obtain a score that's meaningful based on the sample from which the normative scores were derived. It can be natural to want to help the examinee by giving them deviating from standardization procedures, but that is not helpful because it does not give an accurate assessment. Test users need to use only original materials of a test. This means no photocopying record forms or any other part of the test, even though it only may look like a piece of paper. As we covered before, a great deal of work, resources, and effort went into creating all the research behind those record forms, and to be able to fairly recoup our investment, we charge for each of the record forms, as do any distributors. When you photocopy record forms, you risk potentially invalidating any research that those forms have been used to collect data. In addition, there can be consequences for your license or occupation. There are ongoing monitoring of research and clinical data that's used. Stolting, many other agencies will report any violations of photocopying. Relatedly, materials should not be posted online or seen by the general public. This means when you use a test and the results of that test, that should be discussed in a debriefing with the stakeholders, which may be an educational team at school, parents. That testing material should not be given to parents or any other people who are not qualified professionals, as we covered previously. There are copyrights that are being violated if materials posted. In addition, if the general public learns about the testing materials and answers, those tests are invalidated and they can't be used anymore, and any testing that's done with that is potentially invalidated. Use a test only for its intended population. The demographics and population of a test is explained in the manual. And then only people who are within that population should be given the test, as it's only been standardized with that group of people. There are many different tests for many different populations. You need to find the test that is right for that population and for your client. New test editions come out frequently. Demographics change, people change. We spend a lot of time and effort in updating our tests. And that's because changes that occur throughout over time are reflected in scoring. And so therefore, you need to stay current with new tests. And when a new edition of a test comes out, you need to obtain that new test for that results to be considered valid. Again, also remember, each test that you give is only one data point in the complex makeup of a client. So we should practice holistic testing. We would never diagnose just based on the results of one test, and we need to get a great deal of information to really understand the client and communicate the issues to the stakeholders. As an example of requiring additional testing, let's return to the example of the individual who was administered the lighter 3 for difficulties with attention. We found that person had some problems with divided attention and inhibition in particular. Now, we should do some additional testing to explore that issue. We would never do something like diagnose ADHD from the results of just this one test. We need to do some additional testing and evaluation, which may include, first, a parent-teacher-student interview. We want to obtain additional information about that student's functioning in a variety of settings. We should also conduct an observation, which gives an impartial, unbiased understanding of how that student functions in his or her natural environment. We should do some additional attention testing. Being that the lighter 3 is a completely nonverbal test, that gives just one aspect of attention. We should do some verbal and auditory attention testing. We should follow up with some neuropsychological tests, which help us understand executive functions in a more nuanced fashion. Finally, as we talked about, testing should be looked at as a cycle of testing, interventions, and then retesting. So for this student, we should implement some of those interventions we discussed, such as minimizing distractions, seeing how that impacts student functioning, and then retest at a later time, including administering some academic testing as well. If anyone has any questions now or as they're using any Stolting assessments, or if they have any needs for testing, I enjoy working with clinicians to help match tests that we have with existing needs. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, my name is Brian Sizdek. I'm the product manager at Stolting. Here's my contact information. Thank you for your attention and look forward to working with you.